morning. He's our breakfast sponsor. Thank you, Matt. Multipub, Lorna and team, there you go. Reg Ready, please stand up. Thank you. The Shork Report, please stand up. Thank you. And our industry partners, Transparency Systems, Percepta Partners, and Information Today. So thank all of our partners and sponsors. They really were a big partner in ours in bringing this conference to you. So thank you all very much. So a couple of other particulars here. You should, in your books, here's the login for your internet access, so you don't need to use your broadband. We have internet ready. If you forget this, go to the front desk and we'll be happy to help you with that. We are tweeting. You can see the hashtag there. And there's a couple of other things. A number of you are participating in the one-to-one business connection programs. And we have set up over 55 meetings throughout today and tomorrow between people participating in the program at the conference, which is huge. So if you are participating, you are going to be going to the other ballroom over here. We'll direct you, and there's going to be cocktail tables with numbers on that. You need just to go to, at your assigned time, to the table with your number on it, and you can have your meeting. So at 5:30, at the end of the day, Connie Chen, where are you? Please stand up. Connie is the co-chair of the Business Development Working Group, and as any business development professional, you probably know, they decided to lead the charge and meet everybody at the bar at 5:30 and welcome everybody there. So please meet Connie and the Business Development Working Group at 5:30 at Cuba Libre, and then we'll be starting at 6 o'clock at dinner, and that, for all of you veterans who know our dinners here for data content, it's a fun dinner, so do not be late for that. So that's it for the business of things. I'm going to hand it off to Russell to say a few words.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Good morning again, everyone. I wanted to thank you all for coming again to Data Content Conference and enjoying this wonderful weather we're having here in Philadelphia. It looks like it's going to last all the way through the conference. As Kathy mentioned, this is our 21st annual conference. Yes, 21 years old. That means the Data Content Conference is now of legal age in all 50 states, U.S. Commonwealths, and unincorporated territories worldwide. We have definitely come of age. But I don't think it's just the Data Content Conference that's come of age. I'd argue, too, that the data industry has come of age as well. In the early years of this conference, we used to joke that data was sort of like the Rodney Dangerfield of the information industry because we just didn't get any respect. But now, with so many segments of the publishing industry in varying degrees of distress, data is actually now getting a lot of respect. And I think that's great, and I think it's earned. But I also think it's worth spending just a few minutes exploring how this came to be. The data industry is really only connected to the publishing industry because in the days before the internet, we all used to distribute our content using a technology called big fat books. This was not, however, a format of choice. Everyone who was in the business at that time knows just how expensive it was, how constraining it was, how limiting it was. Also, and I think interestingly, perhaps ironically, even though we were distributing in big fat books, we were actually pretty well computerized way back to the early 80s. We were in database form. We had query tools. We had data entry tools. We were doing things online, but only within our own offices. And that was just incredibly frustrating to those of us who saw the potential of actually providing data access directly to our customers in their own offices. So along came the internet, and it was obviously revolutionary. I would argue that for a lot of us in the data business, it was also liberating. For the first time, we had that platform we had dreamed of, that ubiquitous, standardized, low-cost way of putting our data in the hands of our customers. And I think to the credit of our industry, we jumped on this opportunity pretty early. We understood it, we got it, we saw the potential. One thing the industry did not jump on, however, was that wonderful bandwagon of information that wants to be free. Those of us who had subscription products took a pretty hard stance right from the beginning and said, You keep the eyeballs, we'll keep the dollars. Thank you very much. And I think the people who did that now and look back would not regret that decision one little bit. Things like data as a service, great new label, but I'd argue we've been all doing that for at least 10 years now. And increasingly, as our businesses and our products evolve, we're pretty much in the software as a service business as well. So we've been ahead of some of these trends. We've been really thinking about how to evolve our business. We've not only used the internet as a distribution mechanism that's advanced our businesses, we've used it as a data collection mechanism as well. So we've seen the potential, we've acted on it, and we've moved on it, and it's worked to increase our business. Yes, of course, we've spawned a lot of new competitors. I think we're probably all being forced to compete harder than we ever have and to up our games and to create more powerful, sophisticated products. But I don't think anyone who was around in the days of print would really willingly go back to those days. I think we're all enjoying to some level what despite this new competitive environment, all this new creativity and capability that's been unleashed by the internet. So I think on top of all that, not only have we made our data more accessible, we've also made the very smart move, and I think most of us in this room can say, yes, we're in this camp, of not only delivering data to our customers, but increasingly wrapping it inside of software tools that allow our customers not only to access raw data, but to pull it into their workflow, to use it more powerfully, to get analytic capabilities from it, to really make it more central and more core and more important to this business. And I think this rapid embrace of the internet was something that we did right. Sure, we made mistakes like everyone else who piled onto the internet, but we understood the underlying vision. We understood the power of our data, and we saw how to unleash it. And our customers, to a large extent, have embraced it. This business, frankly, is doing pretty darn well, and I think there's a lot more potential in front of us. And all this rapid evolution, I think, is why it's not really hubristic to make the theme of this year's conference, Data is Destiny. Data really is finally realizing its full potential and its full destiny. Even in the areas of big data where a lot of people are still talking about the potential, we're also seeing some creative, innovative data publishers taking advantage of big data techniques to create new products and to find new ways of gathering even more valuable data for their customers in the different products that they're putting out there. And if you don't really, still not quite convinced that data is destiny, I'd urge you just to take a look at the speakers in this year's program. We've got companies like Retail Next that is drawing on all sorts of different types of inputs to really get inside the heads of customers and understand how they move about, think, and purchase in a retail environment. We have companies like Brightscope and Stella Service that are providing critical performance benchmarks that I think are pushing entire industries to perform at a higher level. We've got companies like Segment, which is really using big data technology and techniques to do real-time customer segmentation and some fascinating applications around that. And then companies too like On Deck Capital that's harnessing data to drive small business lending, going, I guess, where banks fear to tread, and doing it with the comfort of knowing that they can rely on data to determine good credit risks for them. So there's a lot of innovation going on in this business. We're blazing some new trails. We're doing some really exciting things out there. And I think it is fair to take this year a theme of data is destiny. But with a big theme like this, you also really have a demand for a keynote speaker, someone who can really talk authoritatively about where the data business has been and what lies ahead. Ideally, we'd want a speaker who would have hands-on experience putting data to work, using it in creative and innovative ways. And even better, we'd like to have a speaker who came from a company that's been intimately involved with data management, software, and hardware solutions. We wanted a company that had strong research credentials and really lived on the cutting edge of technology. We wanted a company, too, that was big enough to see the big picture. So how did we solve this? We looked at this set of requirements and we came up with our answer. And that answer had just 3 letters, IBM. IBM is a company we all know, and I'm sure we all agree that IBM has had a central role in the world of data and its management and its application. But IBM is also a business just like any other business, a business that needs strong sales and marketing to grow its revenues. So how has IBM leveraged technology to support its sales and marketing activities in this fast-changing world in which we all operate? That's a great question, and I'm pleased to report we have the exact right person to answer it. Our keynote speaker today is Jeanette Horan. She is the Chief Information Officer of IBM. Jeanette's been deeply involved in IBM's efforts to leverage technology and data to strengthen IBM's marketing and sales activities. And Jeanette brings to this effort not only experience gained from a number of different leadership roles within IBM, but also experience gained at such industry innovators as Lotus and Digital Equipment Corp.
And speaking of Digital Equipment Corporation, that's where Jeanette and I first met. When we were both in kindergarten, we were part of the founding team of Alta Vista. And it's very interesting, at that point in time, it was an inflection point in business, in the industry, with the formation of great search technology. We were inventing things. We were really discovering things and making things up, quite frankly, as we were going on, as we discovered what this new business was and this new technology was capable of. It was a fun, fun time. And as we really look at where the data business is today, we're at not quite the same, but a very similar inflection point where with technology, with business models, with everything that we're doing, it is at an inflection point where things are changing so fast. So with that, please join me and join Russell in granting a warm welcome to Jeanette.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for inviting me to your conference. It's really interesting as I was preparing for this to think about the relationships that IBM has with you. And some of you are customers of IBM. IBM is a customer of many of you. And I'm sure that there are cases where we jointly go to market together. And so when Kathy asked me if I would come and give the keynote here, I was quite thrilled to be able to do so. And maybe give you a slightly different perspective on what does it mean inside a company like IBM to actually think not about how do we build databases or servers or the things that everybody has to use in managing data, but how do we use data? What does it mean to us? And I thought this might give you maybe a little bit of an interesting perspective and maybe catalyze some discussions during the conference. So I'm going to start out just giving you a little bit of information about IBM, and I promise you it's not a marketing pitch, but I just want to give you an insight into what my world looks like. What do I have to deal with day in and day out? Now, IBM, as you know, is a very large, very large company. We're over $100 billion in revenue, but the things that I deal with, we operate in 170 different countries. We have 470,000 employees. At any one point in time, we have 130,000 subcontractors, and we have 100,000 business partners. So you can just imagine the numbers that I have to deal with respect to the breadth of the business, the number of people I'm dealing with, and I will tell you the number of different opinions I have of how I should be doing my job. I have a lot of advisors. But a couple of other sort of interesting things here, related to IBM. We do have these key business segments of whether it's kind of services, software, hardware, and research, certainly as Russell spoke about. But the workforce that supports all of this has shifted very dramatically over the last several years. And today, 40% of the IBM workforce never comes to an IBM office. They're hopefully out working with clients. We certainly have a number of people who work from home, but they don't come to an IBM office. And this is really because technology has really enabled them to work in all these different ways and to have access to information wherever and whenever they need it. But it certainly does present some challenges to the CIO who's trying to keep control of all of that environment and all of that data and all of that information and manage it in a very secure way. A couple of other interesting facts about our business is that you may have read about some of IBM's business over the last several years. And we've been in a big shift in our business where we've been divesting of what you would consider to be the more commodity products. We don't make PCs anymore. We don't make printers. We don't make hard disk drives. we sold those businesses over the course of the last 10 years, but we've invested in a lot of software and services companies. And again, this isn't necessarily to talk to you about kind of what IBM's offering to the market, but more how does that impact me? And one of the things that it says is that 51% of the IBM employees today have less than 5 years with the company. Now, for anybody who's worked with IBM over the years, this is usually quite a shocking number, because the traditional view of an IBMer is, kind of somebody who joined the company out of college, spends their whole career with IBM, maybe 20, 25 years with the company, when they're in those sales roles interacting with clients. But it's a very, very different world than it used to be. 60% of the employees are in the services business, and a lot of that is in shared service centers around the world, help desk operations, the DBAs and systems administrators that manage our strategic outsourcing business. But this has really caused a fundamental shift in everything that we do and how we do it. And I think that it certainly has brought to us a need to think about how do we engage with this population of employees in very different ways than we did in the past. And I think the days of communication and information flow being from manager and cascading down through a hierarchy are long gone. And so we have to think about how do we provide to these employees the information that they need to be able to go about their daily business. So we have sort of some key trends that you will probably recognize in the industry that I am certainly focused on inside of IBM as well. The first one, obviously, big data, right? Everybody's talking about big data. And what I'm going to share with you today is a lot around how we are using data to help different parts of our business to be able to make smarter decisions, if you like, which brings us really into this sort of area around advanced analytics. Because one of the things that I'm sure, again, I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but just having all of the data in some database somewhere is not useful to anybody. And one of the challenges with big data is, we've got a lot of data, but how do we make it useful? How do we really get the insights that the business needs to be able to act on that data and to start to be able to predict outcomes? And these are really some areas that we're focused on. Obviously, a couple of other trend areas I'm not really going to touch on as much today, but supporting this workforce is really around how do we use cloud computing in all of its forms, whether it is data as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, but also the impact of social and mobile. And when you look at my population, I told you, I'm supporting 600,000 people on a daily basis. That is a whole social ecosystem in and of itself. And so how do we leverage social tools to allow those 600,000 people to feel connected to each other and to be able to share information and expertise? And then, given that most of them are out of the office, how do they do that now using all of their mobile devices? So it brings in a lot of sort of ecosystem things that I, as every CIO I speak to, is really kind of worried about and concerned about. Now, data, as you all know, kind of is everywhere. And kind of a couple of really sort of important aspects here around sort of some of these data facts, if you will. The first one being that, of course, 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. And I would assert that with the Internet of Things, which hopefully you all have heard about, that is just going to explode even more. As every device becomes instrumented and is putting out data about itself, that explosion of the data is just going to go up enormously. A lot of companies say they need an analytics strategy, but many of the CIOs say, but I don't know how to go about really providing that insight for my constituents. And 83% of CIOs in one of our recent studies said, that business intelligence and analytics are really part of their visionary plan. But when you look at what they're trying to do and the gap between their ability to actually deliver that, I think that says that is a huge opportunity for all of us to be able to support the CIOs on that quest. One of the other interesting facts that I see here is this fact that 80% of the world's data is unstructured today, And we'll come back a little bit and talk about what does that mean kind of inside of IBM, because it certainly is true for us as well. Much of our data is totally unstructured, and it really does present enormous challenges for how do we share information across the company and how do we make sense of it for a lot of people. But we know that big data is one thing, but really it's not just about the data. It really is about this whole ecosystem of players that sort of participate in here. And I find myself a customer of all of these players, right? Whether, I obviously need to worry about, kind of the databases and the storage and being able to manage all of the data. But I also need to have not only the internal data that I have from IBM, but for me, the real value in the data is how do I marry that data with external sources of data that I know that many of you are providing, so that I can get the insight not just from one source of data, but how do I combine it and marry it together that's really going to give me the biggest insights to the business. So what I want to do is share with you a few examples that maybe will get you thinking about how is this all changing what's happening inside of IBM. And the first area I really want to talk about is really around marketing and sales. And this, as Kathy said, it's all about how do we grow IBM's business. Now, if you think back, so let's just go 10 years ago, your vision of an IBM salesperson is the blue-suited guy who shows up and with his briefcase and all of his product literature and information and sort of walks into the CIO's office and sits down and says, let me tell you what I think you need. Maybe they might have listened to what the business requirement was, and where the business is, but basically it was like, here's what we have to offer, and they're bringing it to you. Today, by the time the blue-suited sales guy shows up, the customer has already done a lot of research on their own. The sources of information that the customer has, far outstrip what the sales guy can tell him today. Now, he may have found information just from, kind of browsing on our website and on our competitors' websites. They may have used sources like Gartner as an example, or Forrester, that will provide industry views and recommendations and analyses and comparisons of different products. But they also are far more likely to have gone out into their social media connections and gotten opinions from other people who are either using the products or people who they know that have been working with products or services, and they come to the discussion with a preformed opinion. And that actually, is really great in a lot of ways, but it changes the conversation, right? It's no longer, I'm the sales guy, I know what's best for you. It's really the salesperson has to understand what's happening with my customer. How can I present more information in an appropriate way to that customer? And how can I fit my products and services into their current business need? And what we're trying to do now is really taking this concept of applying what are kind of B2C techniques, around how do you get to this marketing to a segment of one, right, that a lot of people are talking about now. How do we bring that into the B2B world? And historically, when IBM thinks customer, we think company, right? To me, when I think about master data, right, a customer master data number is it's a company. It's American Express, right? It's Coca-Cola, whatever it is. That's a customer to IBM. But the reality today is I need to know who is the person, not who is the company. I need to know, is that person a CIO? Is that person an infrastructure manager? Is that person a CMO? What is their role in the company, and how do I want to relate to that person? And I think that is dramatically changing how we think about how we use data in terms of marketing. Now, if we want to be able to do this marketing to the audience of one, I need a lot more information than I used to have. And I need to know not only is this person the CIO of a particular company, but I want to know what relationship do they have with IBM? Have they worked at other companies before that have been good IBM customers? Have they worked at companies before where they bought from our competitors? What do they think about IBM? How can I build all of this information about this person so that I know that when our salesperson does sit down with them, that they have all of this data and all of this information at their fingertips? So we're in process of building out what we call our individual data master, which is instead of a customer master, that builds a lot of this information and brings in with it a lot of information that's out there in public data sources, whether it's kind of social profiles like LinkedIn or what they're seeing on Twitter. What are the different things that this person knows? I also want to know what is their actual authority level. Are they actually a decision maker or are they an influencer? Kind of how do I really want to relate to this person? So that I can start to build out this information very robustly that allows our marketing teams to be able to really present to that person something that is more likely to be relevant to them. Once we have this information, when the customer comes, for example, if they're coming to IBM.com and they're looking for information, I'm now able to provide them a much more personalized experience. If they're a software developer, they're much more likely to be looking for technical support help than the marketing information about the next line of servers, as an example. If they're a CMO, they're much more likely to be interested in more industry vertical solutions rather than raw hardware. So how can I actually start to guide them through a more personalized experience that gets them to the next best action, right? How can I make sure that they're either going to download the white paper that they need? Am I going to present them the opportunity to talk live to a person? Are we going to invite them to a next seminar in their city? We can now get to the point where we can actually really start to engage with that person in a different way as we start to build out that richness of the content about the individual. And so this is really how we're starting to change our traditional ways of thinking about marketing. And I know as a CIO, and probably some of you are responsible for it as well, I get a tremendous number of, I'm going to call them unsolicited marketing emails from different companies who would like me to kind of buy or attend a seminar or something. And I will tell you, I mean, in many of those cases, they have no idea who I am, right? I mean, I get them from IBM competitors, and why they think I'm going to come to their seminar is really interesting. But when you think that if you could really sort of use this intelligence about thinking, who is the person and what is the context in which they operate, you could have a much higher likelihood of actually sort of getting the person to actually take some action as opposed to click the unsubscribe link at the bottom of the email, which is what I always do. So it's really is how do we really sort of think about the engagement with individuals in a different way? Now, it's not just about this sort of kind of broad area of marketing as well, but if you think about it from an inside sales perspective where we have a customer and we want to maybe upsell them on a new product, we now have access to a lot of different information, and a lot of it is from external data sources that really talks about, kind of where are our competitors strong. We can bring all of the information, all the market intelligence data that is not just about our position, but about the position of our competitors, and marry that with the data around that we know around what that customer has already bought, what they have installed, what we have done with them previously from a marketing perspective. Have they downloaded white papers on new servers, as an example, that they might be interested in going to buy? And we can marry that with our analytics and say, what is their propensity to buy? And then we can give insight to our inside salespeople so that they are prioritizing the calls that they're making out to customers to places where they are more likely to get a success rate. And so what we're starting to see is that the return on the time for the inside salespeople is going up dramatically as we're able to give them much better insight. They're doing far less cold calling and really much more really kind of targeted on sort of getting into those existing customers. And in another area that's really much more around much more advanced analytics of what we're doing, we're helping our sales leadership team think about how they even organize their sales forces. And when you think about it, again, I told you, we're in 170 different countries. We have a huge customer base. We have a huge partner base. The challenge for the sales leadership is, okay, I've got 45,000 sales resources. How do I assign them to accounts or to territories or to business partners? How do I optimize the use of that 45,000 people? And historically, it's really been up to a country manager or a territory manager who sort of takes his or her knowledge or insight around what's happening in their local region and says, I think I'm going to put, kind of Joe over here on these 3 accounts and Susie over here on these 5 accounts. And we'll give them a quota, right, to, a sales quota, as everybody has, that they're expected to meet to bring in revenue. And one of the things that we found was, as we started to do analytics on IBM's sales performance, we found a number of very interesting aspects. What we found is that we had clusters where we had a lot of people who were allocated to accounts that are very IBM friendly and do a lot of business with IBM, which kind of intuitively makes sense, right? You want to cover your customers. But we had huge white space. We were leaving so much opportunity on the table because everybody was clustered over a small number of accounts. And what we further found was that the way the quotas were distributed, they were so uneven that a lot of the salespeople really felt they had no way of meeting their quota, and that they really could not succeed. And this is very demotivating. I mean, obviously, you want your salespeople to be challenged and to have a sort of tough quota, that they're really sort of out there, hungry, trying to meet that quota. But if it's so high and so out of reach, it just becomes demotivating and demoralizing to everybody. So what we've been able to do is to take a lot of information that is about the historical sales performance, looking at it not only by client, that says how much have clients bought before, but also looking at it from the perspective of, if we have a brand new salesperson who hasn't yet come up the learning curve, what is their productivity versus somebody who has 10 years in the company and is so well versed in what's their productivity. Looking at that with our existing clients, but also marrying that now with more of the data around what's in the white space, who's buying from our competitors, what are the opportunities to put people into these different areas. And we're fundamentally reshaping the whole way that we do sales coverage and the way that we allocate quota sort of out to our salespeople to give very higher proportional chances of success. And as we've been working on this, we've been sort of piloting in a few geographies. And what we found is that the difference in business results from the geographies that have embraced this new coverage model and are using the analytics and really making changes to shift their workforces, in average, their business results were 10% better than those that didn't. And so that sort of has given us this sort of, real thinking that, sometimes it's really hard to sort of plan just by spreadsheets, right, and the numbers. You need to take the human factor into account as well. But it really has given all of the sales leaders really something to think about. And we're saying we're not going to replace your intuition completely, right? You shouldn't blindly follow this model. But it might give you some insight and some guidance into how you might reallocate the resources you have to deliver a better business result. And I think we're seeing some pretty impressive results from that right now. But I will tell you, interestingly, the hardest thing to overcome is the 30-year veteran who says, you can't tell me anything that my gut doesn't already tell me. And that is something that I think as we all move into more sort of, kind of analytics, how do we really help the business to understand the power of harnessing the data that they have that would really maybe give them some new insights. So those are some of the things that we've been doing with respect to kind of the sales and marketing and trying to sort of drive growth. But I will tell you, it's not all about marketing and sales inside of IBM. We've been using data and analytics to really help the business become what we call a smarter enterprise, right? It's like, you want to be able to make better decisions, but you also want to be able to make those decisions much more quickly using real-time data and real-time insights. And I just brought, kind of a few examples here of some things that we're doing. Even in our core finance operation, who you would say historically, is excellent about analyzing numbers, right? That's what they do for a living. But we've really been able to bring some new insights to them and help them think about some things in some different ways. In the area of risk, I mean, this is just a huge issue for every company right now, and certainly for every CIO, around what we're looking at with respect to compliance and risk and security and fraud, some other areas around what we're doing there. And then in just core operations, operational efficiency, how do you move from watching the data to actually anticipating what's going to happen and being able to respond and to head off issues before they become issues? These are some of the things that we're doing inside of IBM to make IBM, as I say, kind of a much better place and a much smarter enterprise. So if you start with finance and think about finance, for years, companies have been all about process efficiency, right? We've been working on this for a long time, right? It's how do we automate processes? How do we take people out of the equation? How do we make the information flow seamlessly? And we've really been focused on this for a good number of years. And we now are at a point across my very broad enterprise where even things like knowing how many people are actually on board today sounds like a really simple question, but actually it's a really hard question to answer because the workforce is very dynamic. And we actually had a situation recently where our CFO and HR leader were in a meeting, and the CFO was saying, well, my data here is like, 24 hours old that I'm presenting in this information, but the HR leader's data was like 4 weeks old. And he was saying to her, well, how come your data is so out of date? And it's because, the investments that the different parts of the business have made in getting to these seamless information flows and global processes and being able to harmonize across all the data and trying to get structure into the data so that you can actually start to pull information and insights out of that data in a different way. In our finance organization, we've been able to do that. So now, 90% of all of our business forecasts are generated automatically. Kind of the core information is taken out of our sales forecasting systems, kind of fed into the business and consolidated up across all of those 170 countries so that at the top, the leadership team can actually make decisions in their operational processes on a much more real-time basis with respect to reallocating resources or shifting priorities. But what we're really moving towards now is this sort of kind of really being much more sort of predictive and fact-based. And this is where we are not only looking at the internal IBM data. And an example that we have, we've been looking at kind of how do we anticipate risk at a country level. Now, I told you we do business in 170 countries, and as you can probably imagine, they're not always the most stable countries. I could say the US isn't the most stable country today, but they're not always the most stable countries. And how do we sort of have a way of looking at all of the geopolitical data and the economic data and really start to sort of understand what's happening on a global level, and how can we sort of anticipate where there might actually be issues that maybe we might want to start moving cash around in a different way, right? How do we optimize cash? This is an example of how, as I say, kind of our finance organization is really stepping outside of the boundary, kind of the IBM walls and looking outside and bringing in all of this external data to start to manage these things in a different way. And our finance team is also starting to say, okay, how can we take our data and how can we now help to provide that to the sales team that maybe helps us think about where the growth opportunities are. So it's changing the relationships again. It's kind of what is typically thought of as, kind of the accountants with the green eye shades are now truly able to add business value in the discussion around what's happening with the business. Second area is around the integrated supply chain. We're still a very big hardware company, so we have a big manufacturing operation. And manufacturing operations are typically, they've been always very process-oriented, very metrics-oriented, very analytical organizations, right? They're all about how do you optimize parts and how do you optimize the supply chain. And I think that anybody who's worked in manufacturing organizations knows that this is the world of operational research, right? And everybody's grown up thinking about metrics and data. But our supply chain has actually started to sort of, again, think kind of beyond the boundaries. And they started to recognize that suppliers sometimes, for some of the parts that go into our systems, that, there were warning signals that, maybe the quality of the parts that were coming in were starting to go down. And this, of course, has huge impact to us as we ship systems if they're under warranty. We have to deal with all of the warranty costs, all the repair costs, replacing all of those defective parts. And they've invested in what they call a quality early warning system, which is very much focused on our suppliers. And as you can see here, some of the data points, we have over 100 suppliers for our hardware business and 60,000 different parts. They're able to sort of look at, kind of trending and reporting, looking for anomalies of when there's maybe a change in the quality of the incoming supply that we can kind of head off and not put those parts into the products and look for an alternate supplier. And they've been able to demonstrate significant savings to the business by being able to sort of think about how do they manage this much more efficiently and much more effectively. And this one is probably an example that's sort of, to anybody who's been in the manufacturing business, it's kind of an obvious example because, as I say, it's what supply chains and manufacturing organizations are all about. It's what they know how to do extraordinarily well. But another area that's really coming to play now, because of some of the changing dynamics around all of those employees, any organization, any CIO that you talk to today, if they don't bring cybersecurity into the conversation, that I would be very, very surprised, right? Any group of CIOs that get together, cybersecurity always today sort of lifts to the top of the agenda. And the reality for any organization of a reasonable size today is that you have millions and millions of what you could call incidents. Now, an incident can be anything from a huge denial of service attack to, kind of the person, an employee inadvertently clicked on a link and brought some malware in, to, the sort of targeted hacktivist attackers who are trying to get in to kind of steal your data. But there are millions upon millions of incidents that happen. And the challenge for all of us is how do we get our arms around that, and how do we know what's really going on, and how do we know what we really need to focus on? And so we have now invested both in a lot of things, first of all, around educating all of our employees on what they should and shouldn't do and how they need to protect us. But if they do see something amiss, how do they report it so that we can actually get earlier insight into it? So, if you think you've picked up a malware, we ask you to report it instead of waiting for it to pervade kind of through the environment. But we need to be able to sift through all of those millions of incidents and reports, because not the incidents are sometimes reported by systems and infrastructure as opposed to by people. We need a way to kind of sort through all of that and try and filter and figure out what is really important. And also, by taking some of the external data sources around risks and threats and what's happening out in the hacktivist community, what defenses do we need to put up so that we can actually start to think about how do we protect our environment in a different way? And so one of the things that we've been able to do with this is really taking, as I say, the millions of incidents that we get in a month and bringing it down to the handful of, kind of probably, less than a dozen that we would consider to be noteworthy incidents or things that we really need to go investigate and figure out exactly what happened and how much damage has been done and what do we need to do to remediate that. And it's only by using some of the analytics and intelligence that we're able to manage this, because otherwise it would just be a totally overwhelming burden to my team. We would have no way of really being able to monitor what's going on. So those were sort of, kind of three examples in the business that you may not traditionally think about around how data is being used in different ways to help generate some different business outcomes. And hopefully it gives you a little kind of food for thought here. But I mentioned before, the reality today is that, kind of 80% of the data is unstructured data, and so much of the data was created, kind of in the last 2 years. And so our analysis has to be not just about, rows and columns and numbers that are in databases, but how do we really understand what's happening with all of this unstructured data? And I mean, example, again, our supply chain has actually put in place what they call a social media listening pilot, which is, they're actually kind of, looking at everything that's related to all of those suppliers, so that if they see, again, sort of, indicators that maybe other customers of those suppliers are starting to complain about quality, or they see that there's unrest in a particular geography for one of our suppliers, how can they make sure that we're getting alternate sources of supply? And these are things that we wouldn't necessarily have known if we just watched the parts coming in. But again, it's getting ahead and anticipating of kind of sort of looking at some of the data that's outside. One of the things that we're really focusing on internally with different parts of the business is really sort of getting to this notion of sort of dashboarding, because we have to make sense of all of the data that's out there. And if we can use different visualization techniques that help us to really kind of draw the eye more quickly to what's hot and what's trending, I think that is something that we are definitely doing, and I'm hearing again, a lot of our customers are really interested in. And again, it's sort of pulling together and aggregating all of the different things. What are IBMers saying out on social media? What are other people saying about us on social media? Internally, what are the topics that are trending on our internal social media platform that maybe there's some bubbling up somewhere that we need to alert HR that there's some issue that's kind of surfacing? When we do a new product launch or product announcement, I'm often asked by our CEO, kind of what are people saying about it? And so we really need to be able to have a way where we can actually get, more real-time insight into kind of what's happening and what's trending. And this notion around providing dashboards with different visualization techniques is one of the things that we're really investing in to help our business at this point in time. So the question really is, so what is next? We've got all of this data that we're using. We're trying to marry internal and external data. I mean, I would say that we're sort of in the infancy of our journey with respect to this. We have huge amounts of data inside of IBM. And the real question is, how do I make that data available to the business in a way that they can actually not just react on it, but how can they really sort of move towards anticipating and really kind of thinking about sort of what's happening next. And it's sort of interesting when you think about the sources of data and this notion around kind of the Internet of Things. And I was actually at a conference a little while ago where somebody sort of made an interesting point. He sort of held up his cell phone and he said, you may think about chipping your animals, right? So if they get lost, you can find them. He says, well, guess what? You've all been chipped, right? And it's through your cell phone. There's a huge amount of information and data that's out there about you. But now, the hot trend today is around different kinds of devices that are collecting data. And you think about the Fitbits and all of the other information that's around you. And you can sort of imagine a scenario in the not too distant future where, kind of when you're at your gym here, number one, you're on the treadmill and your Fitbit actually is communicating with, your doctor's offices and says, wait a moment, there's a trend going on here. This guy's about to have a heart attack. And the Fitbit actually calls the ambulance before you have the heart attack. And so it's there waiting for you, gets you off to the hospital, and hopefully you have a positive result. And this sort of sounds somewhat far-fetched, but I tell you, it is not that far away. When you think about what's happening today with this notion, as I say, kind of this notion of the Internet of Things, think about it, it's not just about sensors. I mean, hopefully everybody sort of loves, kind of like traffic sensors that tell you when there's backups, on the roads and you can reroute. These are all examples of the Internet of Things. But as this becomes kind of much more personal, what's the implication to everybody as an individual around how you can take advantage of some of this new technology and the data and the systems and the software that are going to marry all of these data and start to anticipate events and outcomes and take the appropriate action to head them off. And this sort of really brings me to the fact that data is everywhere. But I think that we really have only just begun to tap into it. And I think that the state of the art for, a lot of organizations today is really in data mining, maybe more traditional business intelligence. And I think what we're really moving towards is these two things that are kind of sort of under the tip of the iceberg, which is around this getting to much more predictive outcomes. Really sort of starting to think about what is going to happen as opposed to what just happened. And then about learning systems, about kind of how are the systems going to become smarter and more intelligent and actually sort of provide richer information kind of over time. And while I think we have only just begun, we have begun. And one of the things that you may be aware of that IBM has been investing in from our research perspective is really around this area of cognitive computing. And this is really about the development of systems that learn. And you probably are all familiar with the Jeopardy example of a couple of years ago of the Watson computer beating the two Jeopardy champions. But of course, Jeopardy was really just a sort of it wasn't about winning a game, right? I mean, it was about, could we develop a system that could learn, that could then be used to actually sort of deliver different outcomes. And we have a lot of different now uses of kind of making that technology available for different business cases. And one of the ones that I'm actually personally kind of most excited about is the ability to really improve healthcare. Now, I think we're a long way away from, kind of Watson being your doctor, right? Around you sort of, sitting in front of the terminal and having a dialogue with Watson to diagnose your symptoms. But when you think about the amount of research that's in medicine these days and the new volume of information that's coming out, your average general practitioner is really stressed to keep up with all of that, right? So, can Watson become a medical assistant to say, given a set of symptoms or a set of conditions that a patient is presenting with, kind of what are the likely causes of that? And, and it will never replace a doctor, but as a guide to the doctor, to help the doctor, I think, is really an interesting area. And we actually have some pretty interesting partnerships with people like WellPoint and Memorial Sloan Kettering right now, with Memorial Sloan Kettering specifically looking at cancer care and how we can really kind of sort of focus on some of this and help. And there are other examples of where Watson is being applied as well. And one of the things that I've been doing is I've been trying to think about how do I apply Watson inside of IBM. You think about my very broad employee population, they always have a lot of questions and kind of they want to know where to get information or things. And one of the things that we've really learned and discovered is that the data that we have inside of IBM, largely because of history, is completely unstructured, but is also not organized or categorized into a taxonomy, is not tagged, all of the things that probably many of you do extraordinarily well to be able to make your information searchable and findable within the IBM corpus of knowledge. It's actually 10 times bigger than the knowledge base that was used for Jeopardy. And completely unstructured. It's a very different challenge and problem as to how can you actually get the same kind of cognitive computing with that completely unstructured data. My medical example, of course, medical journals are extremely well structured and organized and tagged with taxonomies, etc. And they provide a nice body of data that can really be used for this. So I think this is sort of the next era of where we're all heading. And as I say, something that I'm kind of planning to sort of bring into IBM as well. So I'm going to end my remarks there, and I know we have a few minutes here. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.